The 10th anniversary of the Marikana Massacre brings public order policing and the use of weapons into sharp focus. You remember those visuals where police fired live ammunition at the group of mine workers on the Kopi in Marikana in the northwest in August 2012. Now, looking back, what are some lessons to draw from this tragic incident? Let's bring in Adele Kirsten from Gun Free South Africa. Adele, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Thank you very much for joining us here on eNCA. It is a sad day indeed, 10 years on, as we reflect on what happened on that fateful day on Marikana, as we remember that massacre. Public order policing in South Africa was put under the spotlight. I mean, the world saw the use of live ammunition when the police opened fire using their R5 rifles.
Dan, you're right, and I think it's an important day where we remember the families who lost loved ones across that entire 10-day period, actually. But I think it did a number of things. So one is, and important for viewers, is that the public order policing units were not very active and present in the Marikana Massacre. It was the tactical response team police members who used the R5. But what I think it demonstrated was the inability of our public order units to deal with complex crowd situations where the dynamics are moving swiftly, where they're changing, and the inability to be able to respond appropriately, to de-escalate the tension, to enter into some kind of negotiations, because often they are confronted with crowds, some of whom are armed. And so a key kind of principle for POP units is knowing the principle of differentiation, where you understand, who some of the instigators are, who's carrying the weapons, and to try and isolate those individuals rather than treating the crowd as this monolithic whole. So I think that was the one thing we saw, and that was a large part of the panel of experts' focus, was to look at ways in which to strengthen their capacity to manage large crowds. Yeah. The other thing I think that the Marikana Massacre showed was the inappropriate use of weapons.
The inappropriate use of weapons. You are saying that on the ground on the day, it was the tactical response team or unit that was there. They are the ones who are armed with R5s, but not the public order policing. But one would have thought, with the days leading up to that fateful day when the people had been killed, I mean, that and the gathering was happening on the day itself, public order policing would have been deployed. Sadly, we've seen from the investigations that even the commander of the police who was on the ground was not trained in public order policing. Use of live ammunition and the use of rifles. I mean, in policing in general, what have you found out as your panel of experts were grappling with this? Do the police know when and how? When is it acceptable? Is it acceptable at all to use live ammunition? Remember what happened in Braamfontein the other year during the Fees Must Fall protest by students? I mean, one young man ended up being shot and killed.
Mtukuzi, so we're looking at two kinds of, Dan Moyane, I was talking about Mtukuzi and Tumba. That was the use of rubber bullets and, shotgun. So that's a less lethal weapon. That's very different to an R5, which is a fully automatic weapon. And so I'm going to deal with them separately. There were senior police officers who were part of the panel of experts, and after 2 years of sitting, there was really very strong consensus that R5s are to be prohibited. They must be prohibited in any crowd control situation. It is inappropriate. I think that is now accepted. The gap right now is that understanding is not entrenched across SAPs. And all that's required is that National Instruction 4 of 2014, which basically tells POP units what they may and may not do. It's sort of a regulation. That statement, in a way, must come in, that R5 rifles are prohibited in the use of crowd control. I think there's widespread support for that and relatively easy to do. The other issue is the use of less lethal weapons. Now, all our POP units are issued with a range of different weapons, stun grenades, tear gas or water cannons, and then, of course, your shotgun and rubber bullets. And these are called less lethal weapons for a reason, because they can cause serious injury and even death in some instances, as we saw in the instance of Mtukosi Ntumba, who was shot, I think it was last year. But in the panel, we looked a lot at these weapons, and several of them are designed to disorientate the crowd, sometimes to create some panic and chaos, like something like the stun grenade, as well as the tear gas. But we spent a lot of time looking at the use of shotguns and rubber bullets. And there was a lot of debate about whether they are fundamentally an indiscriminate weapon. And what that means is that once you've fired, so for example, a tear gas canister is an indiscriminate weapon. Once you've fired the tear gas canister, you have no control over where the gas goes. It can hit someone who's got asthma. There can be a small child in the crowd. And we began to debate whether rubber bullets and shotgun, whether that less lethal weapon is fundamentally an indiscriminate weapon. And gun-free, and certainly I am of the view that it should actually be taken out of public order policing. But the panel made a recommendation that there needed to be much stricter guidelines on who may fire the shotgun with rubber bullets and under direct command. And I think that's still been debated. For example, what does direct command mean? Does it mean your commanding officer instructs an individual POP unit member to fire now at that individual? And I think that kind of detail still has not been settled.
Yeah, and that's a big gap, because if you say, for example, a simple instruction written according to a particular procedure of the police would enable officers to know, the public order policing to know that they cannot use R5 rifles, for example. But if something is that simple, it's creating such a big gap, it concerns me that it's taking such a long time. While you say during the panel of experts, the discussions in that particular panel, even the police officers were in agreement in principle, it's just taking too long, and it's a very dangerous gap to have.
Absolutely. I mean, the panel sat for 2 years, from 2016 to 2018. We had robust debates. We didn't always agree, but at the end of the day, the report that was handed over to Minister Cele in July of 2018 was a consensus report that everyone in the panel, including the senior police officers, there was agreement on the recommendations. And then the report was only made public in March last year. We are clear that the recommendations were prioritized according to what we saw as sort of large institutional systemic change, but then a significant proportion of the recommendations were focused on how public order units, behave and act in the field, in the moment. And some of them are more long-term, but others were really what we would call quick wins, what could have been done easily, immediately, but, for example, also changing some of the National Instruction 4 of 2014 to make it very clear, for example, where an instruction says you may, that opens it up for discretion. The instruction must say you shall or you must, to make it very clear that this, in a way, it's an instruction rather than open to discretion. So we think there's room right now for quick action on entrenching the fact that R5 rifles and any rifle or any weapon capable of automatic fire, it must be entrenched that it is inappropriate and shall not be used.
Yeah, because right now, that's not the reality, Adele. Right now, that's not the reality, and I'm sure it's going to be worrisome for someone like you and others who were part of that 2-year-long consensus-seeking panel discussion where you came to some consensus around the way forward, that there's still a gap. So I'm just imagining here, I just want your thoughts, just for now, just a thought came to my mind to say, if there was an event where there's a group of protesters and things are violent, and then you've got these armed policemen and women on the ground, because there's no directive, if I can use that word, that says you shall not use live ammunition, a trigger-happy officer might just pull the trigger.
So, Dan, to be fair to the SAPS since Marikana, I think that has been an important lesson learned, that the POP members no longer carry R5. So in practice, they're not using them. And you saw that last year in the July unrest. And if you talk to a lot of cops, they said we learned from Marikana that even though there was frustration from the population saying, why aren't you stopping the looting? They were absolutely clear that to shoot into that crowd would be tantamount to another Marikana massacre. And they did not. And that was the correct behavior. So as far as we are aware, automatic rifles have not been used in crowd management.
Okay, no, that's certainly a positive step. Yeah, thank you very much, Adele. Thank you. Thank you for your time and your explanations and taking us back to that time of how the lessons from Marikana have been used to try and improve public order policing. That's Adele Kirsten there talking to us. She's from Gun Free SA. She was part of a panel of experts post-Marikana that was put together, including the police, to look at the lessons of the Marikana massacre in order to avoid a reoccurrence in our country.